So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to our board bootcamp session. Today, our aim is to get your board on board and to set your nonprofit organization up for success. My name is Genevieve Kirk, and I am the Center for Nonprofit Excellence Director at the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. So just a few housekeeping notes for today. We have a fairly large group in attendance today. I see 33 participants so far. So a few housekeeping notes. First, I ask that you please mute your microphone unless if you're speaking. If you are joining us by audio only today, please introduce yourself when speaking. When our three presenters are talking, we invite you to use the chat function to ask questions, and we'll aim to answer your questions as they come up. We'll offer a dedicated Q&A time at the end of all three presenters. So if your pressing questions haven't been answered during the presentation, that will be an opportunity to ask questions. And just to note that this session is being recorded for the benefit of participants who were not able to join us today for our live Zoom session. So today's agenda, we have three different parts for today's training. We're going to start with who does what, roles and responsibility of board members. Then we will move into building board diversity, and we'll finish out with demystifying your nonprofit organization's financial statements and audits. Now we have a lot of information to share with you today, but we also want our time together to be as interactive as possible. So you'll have a few opportunities during our session to answer some poll questions. We will invite you to respond to a couple different questions during our presentations, either in the chat, or you can voice your questions if you're comfortable with that. So we hope that you get a lot of good information out of today's training so that it's relevant for the work that you do at your nonprofit organizations. So I'd like to start by introducing our presenters. I'm over here, Genevieve Kirk. I'm the Center for Nonprofit Excellence Director at the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. And today I am joined by my colleagues, Angie Hatfield-Marker, our President and CEO at the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. Hello, Angie. And also,
hi, everyone.
So Angie will be speaking today on board diversity, and Katie Birmingham, a certified public accountant and manager at Clifton Larson Allen. Hello, Katie.
Hello, everybody.
Katie will be addressing your nonprofit's financial statements. So thank you both for being here and for sharing your knowledge with our group today. So as we get started, we would like to get a sense of who is with us in today's training. So in a moment, I will be launching a poll which should pop up on your screens. If you can please select what is your primary role at your organization. Okay, so your response options would be, are you a board chair? Are you a board member? Are you a prospective board member, executive director, CEO, staff member, or other? I'll just give a few moments here for you to respond to this question. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close out the poll. Looks like I've got most responses in. Thank you. Great, let me share these results back with you. So we've got a lot of board members here today, about 30%, 36% of our attendees, and then also some board chairs. So great, welcome. And then after that, I see a lot of executive directors and CEOs. Thank you for joining us today, staff members and prospective board members as well. I know we have a couple folks observing from the University of Illinois. We welcome you. Thank you all for being here and for spending this time with us today. Okay, well, I am going to go ahead and kick things off for the first part of our training, which is on board member roles and responsibilities. So why are we starting with this particular topic? Well, I know that it sounds pretty basic, but one of the fundamental challenges that far too many board members and boards have is they don't have a really strong understanding of their roles and responsibilities. This comes from boardsource.org, which is based in Washington, D.C. They are one of the sources for the content for today's training. And in a recent report, they note that many organizations and boards are doing well in terms of their fundamental board responsibilities. So things like understanding your organization's mission statement and providing financial oversight. But a lot of board members struggle with external responsibilities. And by that, I mean things like fundraising, advocacy, community building, and outreach. So whether you are here today as a new board member, maybe just starting your first term, or if you've been serving on the board for a number of years, maybe you're even the board chair, my goal for you today is to help you better understand your roles and responsibilities so that your organization can be as successful as possible in carrying out its mission. So I want to start with a question, and I invite your participation on this. What makes a good board member, in your opinion? So what are the attributes that we're looking for in good board members? I invite you to type your response to that question in the chat. My colleague Angie is monitoring that. Or you can voice your response if you'd like. Anyone care to share? What do you think makes a good board member?
So Christine says involved and truly cares about the mission, availability, that they're able to provide leadership and engagement, the compassion and desire to work for the organization, active engagement, firm organization support. Think in the best interests of the organization's mission, know why you're there, being passionate about the organization on which you're a board member. Good
Excellent.
listener. Yeah.
I love these responses. Thank you. Thank you all for participating on that. You've hit on many of the points that I would add there, being able to listen and analyze, think clearly, creatively, ask questions. That's a big one. Even be willing to ask those dumb questions that actually eliminate a lot of knowledge and in the boardroom. So those things are really important. Taking responsibility and also opening doors in the community. That's a huge function that board members can do for nonprofits. So if I had to categorize primary responsibilities of the board, I'd put them in 3 different pots. The first pot being to establish the direction of the organization. The second one being to ensure that your nonprofit has the resources that it needs to carry out its mission effectively. And that third pot is on providing oversight, so governance and ensuring accountability. So I'd like to talk about these in a bit more detail. General expectations of board members. I have a nice little pictographic here for you today, and I'd like to just explain these in a little more detail. So we're going to start with advancing the organization's mission. Board members, you are charged with developing and maintaining focus on your organization's mission and vision. So this will include things like establishing your organization's strategic direction. And part of advancing your organization's mission means ensuring that your organization has those resources that it needs to carry out the mission effectively. So board members, please expect that you'll be engaging in your organization's fundraising process during your term. Fulfilling legal and fiduciary responsibilities. We're going to talk about those, what are those fiduciary responsibilities in detail, but you as board members are actually called fiduciaries because you're legally responsible for managing a nonprofit entity's asset according to state and common law. As a board, you will establish financial policies and ensure accountability. So if you haven't recently, I encourage you to review your articles of incorporation for your organization, your bylaws, all those great governing documents that are foundational to your nonprofit. It's really best practice for boards to be reviewing those on an annual basis. And then coming prepared to board meetings. This is really important. The general expectation is that you prepare for and actively participate in board meetings, which is why that agenda and the board packet should come to you ahead of time so that you have a chance to review it and prepare questions that you want to bring up in the board meeting. Hiring and overseeing the executive director. So if you have a leadership transition that happens during your time as a board member, this might be the most significant responsibility that you fulfill as a board member. So keep in mind your role on the board member, though, is high level. Day-to-day organizational management will be delegated out to that chief executive and/or his or her team. Recruiting exceptional new board members. So your time on the board is going to be limited, set by term limits. So it's really great when you're continually thinking as a board about succession planning. Who will replace you when your term of service is done? What are other gap areas or strengths that could be useful on your particular board? And then be thinking about who in your circle of professional or personal contacts might have those skills and be a useful person to have on the board. If you can nominate those individuals when that time comes in your board cycle, that's hugely important to having planning on the forefront of your organization. And then adopting sufficient communication tools. Our communication is changing so fast, especially during this pandemic. So just the importance here is making sure that your organizational communication tools are sufficient and that you have the resources that you need to communicate well, share files, manage your meetings effectively. And then the last general expectation I have listed out here is serving on committees. And I would add to this volunteering for the organization outside of your board role. So some boards will require their board members to serve on committees. For others, it's optional, but suggested. Volunteering in general is a great way to get to know an organization better from the inside out. So I would encourage you to be thinking about how you can help your organization's events, if they do programs, fundraisers, to volunteer for those. It'll give you new insights on the organization and better equip you for your board role. And be aware that as a board member, you are essentially an ambassador of the organization in the community. And that's hugely important whether the organization is small or big, because you can exponentially increase your organization's public outreach and awareness. So as a board member, hopefully you're able to rattle off your organization's mission statement and key programs using similar language to what the nonprofit staff members are using. And I would say if you don't feel comfortable with that, I encourage you to practice and ideally build this into your board orientation or maybe do a refresher on this during one of your regular board meetings. So typical nonprofit organization chart. Oftentimes new board members aren't completely clear on who is it who does what in this nonprofit organization. Is that the board's job or is that the executive director's job? Who's ultimately in charge? That's a great question. And I'm showing you this organization chart to explain the reporting relationship between these different roles. So the board of directors I have at the top of this org chart. And that's because board members are the legally responsible fiduciaries ensuring the organization's assets and operations are used properly and for those nonprofit purposes. So reporting to the board is the executive director or CEO. The board hires and sets the compensation of the executive director and CEO who is charged with carrying out those day-to-day operations of the organization. The CEO reports to the board of directors and is usually a member of the board of directors, him or herself. At the Community Foundation, our bylaws state, and I quote, "The president and CEO shall serve at the pleasure of the board of trustees and shall attend the board of trustees meetings, but shall have no vote." So the CEO, executive director, participates and reports out at those monthly board meetings, but is not a voting member of the board, him or herself. As board members, you're charged with supporting and evaluating the chief executive, You'll want to ensure that your chief executive has the moral and professional support that they need to further the goals of the organization. And you should be evaluating your chief executive's performance generally on an annual basis. Now, if budget allows, your CEO or executive director may have funds to employ some additional staff members to carry out business functions. And oftentimes, and perhaps in smaller organizations, volunteers are used to carry out some of those business functions as well. Now, I do want to give a disclaimer here that org charts can be a useful visual, but one drawback of this particular org chart is that it shows these relationships in a really top-down manner. And I think a better way to characterize the ideal board executive director relationship is what I call a constructive partnership. So let me talk about what a constructive partnership means. And I quote, "Exceptional boards govern in constructive partnership with the chief executive, recognizing that the effectiveness of the board and chief executive are interdependent. They build this partnership through trust, candor, respect, and honest communication." That comes from Board Source, and I think that really summarizes the ideal relationship that we would see between a CEO and board of directors. So why does this relationship matter? Well, it's huge. This interaction between your CEO and your board, it sets the tone for the entire organization. A board who trusts the CEO is going to feel less need to assert authority, and a CEO who in turn trusts the board won't feel the need to keep the board in the dark or at arm's length, maybe only sharing those positive highlights. It's a relationship built on effective teamwork, and when it is this constructive partnership, it offers energy, productivity, links to networks, access to information, improved decision-making. So I want to now just kind of delineate who does what. Is this the work of the board chair, or is this the executive director? So talking in broad terms, the board envisions the future of the organization. It's the CEO who makes that vision a reality. The board provides oversight. The CEO handles implementation. So your board chair is generally serving in a volunteer capacity, different than your CEO executive director, who's usually on payroll. Your board chair has that really high level decision making. The CEO is that on the ground day-to-day operations. Your board chair is serving for a limited time, so dictated by your term limits. And ideally, your CEO is going to be around for a lot longer and provide that longevity and service to the organization. Your board chair and you as board members are legally responsible for your organization's compliance. The CEO manages the day-to-day financial transaction and money matters. So next, I'm going to break down these responsibilities of board members and how this differs from board and CEO in 4 key areas. So mission, money, programs, and people. Starting with mission. So the executive director, CEO, will work with the board to develop mission, vision, and values. The board's work is to look at those, review them, and then ultimately approve the mission, vision, values. Your CEO executive director will develop an annual implementation plan. Sometimes this is called a work plan. Your board will review that and ultimately approve it, and ensuring that there's consistency with the overall strategic plan for the organization. The board ensures legal and ethical integrity, maintains accountability, is aware of key risks and how to mitigate those. Now, when it comes to money matters, the annual budget is developed and established by the executive director. Usually this happens as a partnership with your treasurer who's on the board. The budget is drafted and presented to the board of directors, who will then discuss and approve the annual budget. The executive director will also work with the board to develop financial policies and internal controls, but it's the board who ultimately has the final say on approving those. The board hires the financial auditor. Your executive director will respond to auditor findings, usually on an annual basis. Your board will review financial indicators, see where adjustments need to be made once the executive director has presented those monthly reports. The board also will approve investment policies. The executive director complies with those. And then the executive director will work with the board to develop some fundraising strategy for the organization. Hopefully he or she might even have a development director who's charged with this. And the board's work with respect to fundraising is to support those fundraising activities. And there are many different ways that this can be done. Sometimes asking contacts to provide a donation. Sometimes it's engaging in writing thank you notes to donors. There are many different ways to support your organization's fundraising activities. With programs, it's pretty simple. The executive director, CEO will develop and implement programs, providing evidence of their effectiveness. The board is basically monitoring that through monthly reports and ensuring that programs are achieving their objectives. And then in terms of people, staffing, we've talked about how the board will hire and evaluate the executive director. All other positions within a nonprofit are generally hired out by the executive director or CEO. That individual will also set compensation and benefits for employees. It's the board who approves those personnel policies and reviews salary information. And then I added here that the board also will draft grievance, whistleblower policies. Hopefully we'll have a conflict of interest policy on hand as well for the board to sign off on, as well as all key staff once they're hired. Okay, last part of my training that I wanted to present to you today is a little legalese on the 3 fiduciary duties of board members. So nonprofit board members have the legal responsibility to meet 3 duties: the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. So legally speaking, you who are board members must meet these certain standards of conduct and attention as you carry out your responsibilities to the organization. So I'm going to break it down for you. What does this mean? So starting with the duty of care, essentially it's that you exercise care in your relationship with the nonprofit organization. You have a legal responsibility to participate actively in making decisions on behalf of the organization and exercising care or your best judgment in doing so. So best practice here is basically to attend those board meetings regularly, showing independent judgment, being informed about organizational activities, making sure that you're relying on trustworthy information with respect to decision making, delegating to responsible individuals, and following up as needed. With the duty of loyalty, the bottom line here is that your loyalty or your allegiance is first to the nonprofit organization and not to yourself personally or professionally. So each board member must put their own interests ahead of personal or professional interests when acting on behalf of the organization in a decision-making capacity. So key things here are avoiding conflict of interest in fact and appearance. And the most common breaches here for nonprofits would be things like taking personal advantage of information obtained through your the information that you hear about in board meetings or in the board packet, or use of organization property or assets for personal gain. And the last one is the duty of obedience. Board members bear the legal responsibility of ensuring that the organization applies with the applicable federal, state, local laws and adheres to its mission. So what is the central mission or purpose for which the organization was created? This is spelled out in your articles of incorporation and bylaws. You are charged with that duty of making sure that the organization is faithful to that. This is important because donors and vendors, when they are making a gift to the organization, they're under the understanding that the funds will go towards this particular charitable purpose. And by exercising the duty of obedience as board members, you are ensuring their public trust that the funds are spent in that way. So if you are like me and you've just heard all of this information, that's a ton of responsibilities and a lot of duties as well. And that is right. Serving on a nonprofit board is an important task, and it carries a lot of responsibility with it. I want to assure you, though, that nonprofit organizations have a responsibility to you as board members as well. Best practices would be for nonprofits to get to know you as much as possible and to share as much about the work that they're doing with you as board members. Some simple ways they can do this: providing a tour of their facility, offering one-on-one meetings with the CEO or key executive staff, sharing a brief history of the organization with you, making sure that you have documents such as the current strategic plan, financials and budget practices, sharing bylaws, organizational structure, making sure that you're clear on what is the expectation they have of you with respect to fundraising and time. And then last, I would encourage all boards to do an evaluation of themselves at some point during the board cycle. How well are you doing as a board? Open up a discussion about that and see if you can come up with ways to improve how your board is running, or are there tweaks that you want to make in how you're working together as a board? So a strong board is essential. The years that I've spent working in the nonprofit sector have shown me #1 marker of a successful nonprofit organization relies on the strength of its board. A strong board is going to ensure that hiring policies are sound, proper financial management is in place. This builds and enhances the public trust. And I just encourage you as board members to pay attention to what the organization is doing. You carry a lot of responsibility and duty in your work. We thank you for that. We need good board members in our nonprofit community. So hopefully this has helped delineate some of your roles and responsibilities a bit more. I'm going to just invite you to briefly ask if there are any questions that I can help answer at this point in time. And you're welcome to put any questions in the chat as well.
Genevieve, will you be sharing your slides? It's a lot of information to digest.
It is a lot of information. And yes, thank you for asking that question. I will, following this session today, share slides from all 3 of our presenters. I'm also putting in the chat for you today. It's a simple 1-page checklist, which comes from BoardSource on roles and responsibilities. If you want to share this with your board members, this is a great reference tool. Okay, well, with that, I'd like to say thank you for hearing about roles and responsibilities, and I am going to hand it off to Angie for her portion of today.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of building a diverse board that works. But before we start our conversation, we just have a short 2-question poll. We'd like for all of you to take a minute to participate before we continue. So Genevieve, will you fire up that poll for me, please? So how diverse would you rate your organization's current board of directors? And do you believe your board needs to seek more candidates with diverse skills and perspective? I'll give it just one more minute. Oh, there we go. So let's take a look at these results. So the majority of you would rate your boards as somewhat diverse, but the overwhelming majority believes your board needs to seek more candidates with diverse skills and perspectives. So that's great. We're going to chat a little bit more about that today. I'll move on to my first slide here. So why does board diversity matter? Our board should reflect the communities we serve, right? So having a board with diverse perspectives is critically important. We each bring our own life experiences and our professional contacts to the boardroom. And when we have diversity of experience and expertise and perspectives, it's going to lead to a stronger position for our organization to plan for the future, manage our risks, make prudent decisions, and take full advantage of local opportunities. A diverse board that's also sensitive to cultural differences is visually one that has a stronger capacity to attract and retain talented board members, as well as to be in touch with community needs. So diversity is a great many things. Hold on, let me go back just a second. I'd love for you to use the chat and just share what you think diversity means in terms of a nonprofit board. There's no right or wrong answer. I just love to see your input here. Genevieve, do you want to read those to me here?
Yes, thank you for those who are responding to the question of what is diversity to you? I see a variety of lived experiences, a wide variety of experience and backgrounds, professional backgrounds. Anyone else care to comment? What does diversity mean to you? Diversity in experiences, employment, social, economical, race and gender, varied experiences and perspectives, varied skills and talents, varied backgrounds and ages.
Perfect. So I'm seeing a lot of the responses that I have here in this next slide. Organizations should consider several attributes when it comes to diversity, including, but not limited to, age, diversity of thought, ethnicity, gender, race, sexual orientation, and geography, just to name a few. We also want to think about diversity in terms of professional experience and skills, especially in the nonprofit sector. Often our nonprofit friends have limited resources, and so they really need to lean on their board members, their volunteer board members, and the professional skills and experience they bring to the boardroom. So nonprofits are always looking for specific professional expertise or skills to help their organization. We have quite a few accountants on our board here at the Community Foundation, but also important are those who are well-versed in advocacy, board governance, capacity building, fundraising, human resources, law, leadership and personal experiences, development, marketing and communications, multilingual board members, organizational management, and technology. Here's some questions to ask ourselves, and I would encourage you to take these questions back to your organization just to open up an open dialogue amongst your board members as you think about diversity and your board makeup. So is our organization's reputation being negatively or positively affected by our board's current composition? If someone were to make assumptions about our organizational values based on our board composition, what would they be likely to think? How well are we cultivating a deeper understanding of the community we serve and bringing their perspectives, needs, feedback, and priorities into our strategic boardroom discussions? Are we ever at risk of making decisions without fully understanding how these decisions might affect those we serve? If we were to make a deeper commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, what would that mean for our mission, our work, and those we serve? When we think about board diversity, is it prioritized in our organization's strategic plan? And what does the future board of our organization look like? So these are just some really good questions that you can ask around your boardroom to spark some good open conversation. When we take a look at our Community Foundation board, we use a matrix similar to this to analyze our board composition. So we want to see where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses, and we want to, as board members, think about these strengths and weaknesses as we're considering and cultivating prospects. So along with the slides that we share today, we'll also share this example of a board matrix that you can take back to your organization and tweak if you like, but to be thinking about the future board for your organization and where you might need to plug in some new, more diverse candidates. So let's talk a little bit about finding new candidates for our board. We want to evaluate and expand the definition of the kind of diversity we bring to our team. We want to be intentional of who we approach, and we want to reach out to local known voices. We want to reach out to local peer organizations, sharing similar missions and a commitment towards diversity. We want to check and see if they'd be willing and comfortable to share some names of possible board volunteers interested in our mission. If you put out communications to your donors and volunteers, you might consider including a question about whether they might be interested in sharing their time and talent and wisdom as board volunteers for your organization. We want to encourage referrals from current board volunteers who represent the minority communities we're looking to engage. And we want to share a hiring post on our LinkedIn page and other forms of social media. I think you could put a call out to your followers saying we're really in need of a certain attribute or a certain professional skill, and you might be surprised at who's following and who would welcome the opportunity to serve on your board. As you're approaching candidates, we want to really do our research. So we want to know about a candidate's background, their qualifications, their accomplishments, interests, their professional skills and expertise. And remember, we're approaching someone for what they bring to our boardroom and not just their demographic diversity. We want to prepare for authentic conversation with the candidate around where our organization and our board are with diversity, equity, inclusion, and we want to educate ourselves on the intentional language around the identities our board represents. We want to share details of specific steps your organization would offer in terms of inclusive onboarding. So we really want to be thinking about, what is your current board's culture, and is it welcoming to individuals before we approach those candidates. And as we're thinking about integrating new board members, again, we want to consider our current board culture. We want to lead meetings through asking questions and making space to include all voices. We don't want to assume our role as an ally. It's okay to admit that we don't have all the answers, but we're committed to the long-term effort. And then regularly ask questions like, what do I need to know? Or how can I help? And what can we do together? Keep a check on unknown behavioral habits, especially when the habits are to take over a meeting or speak longer than a normal expected time. We want to create deliberate space for more voices around our board table. Encourage our board to undertake intermittent trainings on inclusivity and equity. Don't make our team members from demographically diverse backgrounds hold lunch and learn sessions about their lived experience either. A diverse board that works has better access to resources, a better response to external influences, offers better decision-making for the organization, and is better to avoid becoming stagnant. Questions about any of that?
I would just add, Angie, from the chat that someone also included disability as something to be considered for diversity.
Absolutely, absolutely. At the fundamental level, who's serving on our board just directly impacts how we function as an organization and the decisions that we make. So while it's not one size fits all, a board that's homogeneous in any way really risks some blind spots. And we just want to be very aware of that and the negative impact that can have on our ability to make good decisions and plans for our organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. And now I'd like to turn it over to Katie Birmingham, our final presenter for today. Katie?
Hello. Just working on sharing my screen here with you guys. And all righty. you guys can see the presentation here. So I'm excited to be here this afternoon with you to talk about demystifying your nonprofit's financial statements and audits. And don't worry, I will not send a poll out to ask how many of you have read your audit report cover to cover. Understand that many of you may not have done that, and I will probably tell you during this presentation that is okay. So hopefully that does not give you anxiety. So I have a few objectives today. One of these have already been talked about, but I just want to reiterate some of it, which is your fiscal responsibility in this governance role that you have. And then talking about the importance of having an annual audit and those annual financial statements. And we're going to do a very high level overview of the financial statements that you get and what are the important pieces of those that you would want to read through, at least try to understand a little bit from that perspective, and then look for some signs of, is your organization doing well financially, or what are some things that are maybe some red flags that you would want to look at. So again, you don't have to be an accountant to understand some of these things, but just some good kind of key takeaways today so that when you get that audit report, you kind of know what to look for. So as has been talked about, your fiscal responsibility, some of those key items that you as a board member in general want to make sure you're understanding at a high level the annual budget and reviewing and approving that. The monthly and quarterly financial statements, you want to be getting those on a semi-consistent basis at least. If you don't meet monthly, then I don't expect you to get those monthly, but you do want to be looking at those, looking at, again, from a high level, how's the organization doing? And then today what we're going to focus on is that annual audited financial statement that comes again at your year end. And really, what are the key takeaways from that? And what's been noted, but I just want to reiterate again here, is the board hires the auditor. The board's responsibility is to have that relationship with the auditor. And, I, as an auditor, I talk to the boards that I'm working with on my nonprofits. I obviously have to work with management, right? I get the details, I get the financial statements. They're going to be able to answer those questions that I have during the audit process. But I also have that relationship with governance. And all the reports that I have are specifically titled to the board of directors. They also include management, right? Management's very important in that process. But, I work for you as the board. You're the owner of the entity, right? In that sense. And so you need to understand in that fiscal responsibility, what the financial statements include, what that audit report is, and you should be getting a copy of it if you're not. So just want to reiterate that because it's really, really important. So as I started out, I said that you don't probably have to read the full financial statements. Crazy that an auditor would tell you that, right? So I will say that not everybody on the board has to read it cover to cover, but I would recommend you have one person on the board. So as Angie said, they've got a few accountants on the Community Foundation board, which is great. It'd be great to have at least one if you don't have anyone, or somebody at least has a financial statement background. If you don't have somebody on the board, it'd be great to have an audit committee. Somebody at least that can say, I've read the financial statements, I understand them. Again, the key takeaways today are going to be at a high level for all board members to understand, but you do want to have somebody that understands the financials and will read through them completely so that they could ask the auditor those questions if needed. So today, what do you need to know? So as part of the audited financial statement packet, what will come to you as the board is what's called a governance letter, or a governance communication letter is another title for it. Really, this is a 2 to 3 page, easy read summary of any significant items that would have come up during the audit. Were there any audit adjustments? Were there any significant accounting policy changes? Did I have any difficulties with management during the audit process? It's going to be in this letter. It's a good, like I said, easy 2 to 3 pages, not a 40-page audit report, right? So you want to read that. It's directed to you as the board. Just make sure you read through that. Like I said, it's a good summary. If there's any issues there, it's going to tell you from that perspective during the audit process. Another letter that you potentially would get, if there's any written findings or recommendations from the auditors, it's going to be in what's called an internal communication or management letter. Again, a 2 or 3 page, hopefully not more than that, letter that just identifies anything that during the audit process, the auditor said, here's some recommendations. Here's what we found. Here were some deficiencies in maybe internal controls or some lack of reviews, things like that, that we feel that governance, because again, I'm working for governance, right, need to know about what's going on at the entity. Again, 2, 3 pages, like I said, read through this. You want to make sure that you understand where are those deficiencies. If there's a lot of internal control deficiencies, that can lead to issues in your accounting numbers. So as a board, you want to be able to understand what those findings or recommendations are, and can you do anything about them? Sometimes you can't, right? Sometimes it's a lack of segregation of duties. To fix that, you would need to hire 3 more people. We don't have the funds. Okay, but are there other things that you as a board can do to help reduce those risks? So just kind of understanding those things. And again, you can talk to your auditors about that, but an easy read and a good thing that you should be looking for and understanding. So diving into the actual audited financial statements, there's an independent auditor's opinion. So that's what I provide on the financial statements. Again, 2 or 3 pages, easy read, go ahead and read it. And it really just tells if you have an unmodified opinion or a clean opinion, which is what you would want in most cases, but sometimes there is a modified opinion, and there's some different types of opinions there. I'm not going to go into all of those today just due to timing, but if you have a modification, you just want to understand why. It doesn't always mean it's a bad thing. It's just you need to understand the reason for the modification. And then sometimes there's an emphasis of matter paragraph in there that maybe says the prior year financial statements were restated for a certain reason, or there was a new significant accounting policy change, something like that, that again is kind of a red flag to the reader, or just kind of a note to the reader of this is what's going on as we're, as you start to read through the financial statement. So again, 2 or 3 pages, easy read, but again, this is the auditor's opinion on the financial statement. So I would definitely recommend you read through that. And then looking at your audited financial statements, the first, real balance sheet or statement that you're going to see is your balance sheet or your statement of net position. So your assets, what the entity owns, you want to be greater than what you owe, the liabilities to other. And then really that net asset category is, I kind of like to say, the health of the organization. Your income or expense from the prior year are going to run into your net assets. So again, you just, from a high level, look at those total assets compared to liabilities. If your liabilities are growing and your assets aren't, that's something that you want to be looking for. What can we do to kind of change that? Are we entering into too much debt that we just can't take on? And also looking at those net assets. Sometimes the net assets have restrictions, right? Because you get contributions in one year from an individual or an entity, for example, and you don't spend all of that, but it was restricted for a certain purpose of your entity that rolls into the next year. And so sometimes you can use your funds or that net asset balance for general operating activities or kind of a without donor restrictions. But in some cases, a lot of those are restricted for a purpose. And so then you can only use those for a purpose, not for a general operating activity. So you just kind of want to make sure you're seeing what's going on there. When you dive into the income statement or the statement of activities, this is showing your revenues and expenses of the entity. Look at those revenue sources. Are they diversified? If you have one line that says fundraising activity and that's all the money that you get and you have one fundraiser, what happens when an event like COVID happens and you don't have a fundraiser anymore? Could that affect your entity? Will that affect your entity? Is there a way to diversify those funds? So looking at where you're getting revenues from, how that impacts the entity, it's important, right? Should we be diversifying? Maybe we shouldn't. But are there opportunities to do that? But things like that would be at a high level what you'd be wanting to look at in your income statement. And obviously we all get excited for a net income during a year, right? But sometimes you do have a net loss due to the timing of, again, if you get a contribution in one year, but you don't spend the money to the next year, sometimes you could have a net loss. That's okay, right? To have a net loss if you understand why. Now, if you have consistent net losses year over year, that's probably an issue. But again, something to know, something to understand, something to look for. Why? Asking that question again at a high level, understanding what's going on with your organization. The statement of cash flows, easy read, which is nice. It really just gives a summary of what happened to your cash during the year. So you have general operating activities, the normal things you have going on. If you have investments, you've got investing activities, financing, if you have some debt going on. It's a nice read of where your cash went during the year. In general operations, most of it's going to go there, right? But if all of a sudden you see that there's $25,000 of equipment purchased and you're going, we don't have any equipment, that's probably a red flag, right? So it's a good way to see, where did our cash go? Does that make sense to us as an entity? What's going on with our cash flow? Again, if your cash is just decreasing every year, maybe you have an issue with that. Maybe you have a cash flow issue, but again, not always. Maybe just use more cash this year than last year for certain purposes. So again, just something to be looking at, understanding where your cash is going. The statement of functional expenses, This really details the expenses of the organization, and don't get caught up on those percentages in the graph, as I'll explain more, but don't get hung up on that. But you basically have three categories: program services, the mission of the organization, right? That's where we want as many dollars to go to. That's what the organization's there for. That's where people want to contribute their money for. Let's put as many dollars to there and spend the money. So we're working on that mission. That's great. But you have to have management in general to support that. And of course, you want to fundraise for your entities. So you're probably going to have fundraising activities as well. So you want your larger piece of the pie to be the program service expenses, but you're going to have management in general. You're going to have fundraising. You just don't want it to flip flop, right? You don't want that management in general and fundraising to be 90% or 80% instead of your program, right? Because you want those dollars to be going to the mission of the organization. So just something to look at when you look at those percentages. You know, probably in the 70 to 80% range is really a good range for those program services. 90, I don't think I've seen in my over 12 years of auditing nonprofits. I don't think I've seen quite 90%, but that'd be pretty good. But it just doesn't happen a lot of times because you've got those management in general and fundraising activities that occur that need to occur. And if they don't, then obviously the program isn't, or the mission isn't probably happening. But again, there's also a lot of detail in the statement of functional expense. Don't get caught up in that if you're not an accountant. Just kind of look at the percentages at a high level. Where is our money going? Does that make sense for our entity? And then the last piece of the financial statements are what's called the footnotes. The biggest piece of that is your summary of significant accounting policies. Usually that's a note 1 or a note 2. This will not change much year to year unless, kind of like I noted earlier in the presentation, in the governance letter, we'll tell you if there were any significant accounting policy changes. So if you do have any, we'll tell you, then you can reread it, but maybe read it once just to kind of see what's in there, but not something you'd have to read every single year if you didn't want to. And then really all the footnotes do are support the balance sheet and the income statement. If you have investments and you want to understand what types of investments you guys have, that would be in the footnotes. What's included in your property and equipment? Did you get some endowments during the year? Do you have any bequests out there? That kind of information is going to be in the footnotes to support those. So again, you can read it, probably don't have to always read it, but a good idea to kind of read through how your entity is doing. So hopefully that, you know, made you feel a little bit better that I did not tell everybody here that you better go read all those financial statements cover to cover. But hopefully you do understand a little bit more of your responsibility. And I, as an auditor, do look to the board. I talk to the board for every single audit that I do. In most cases, I'm talking to a board president or chair or a board treasurer, just to make sure that, again, from the audit standpoint, I'm focusing on year end. And I can't look at everything, right? I wish I could, but then I drive management crazy. So I ask their opinion. Do they have any issues? Do they have any risks that they see? Are they reviewing the monthly financial reports? If they're not, to me, that would be an issue. Is it an internal control deficiency? You know, really the board's role is to be looking at that. Again, not everybody has to understand everything, but somebody's got to understand and be able to ask management those questions. That's a good thing. You know, management needs to be asked some questions sometimes to make sure things are right, because errors can occur, right? So just want to make sure that you feel engaged in that process. Make sure you know you can ask your auditors questions. They want to know that you're engaged in the process. We enjoy working, you know, with nonprofit boards and making sure that every dollar as much as possible can go to that mission. That's what we all want, right? And so for that to happen, hopefully you're having a good audit that goes well with no findings or recommendations, and you know your entity's in good shape. So thank you guys for your time today. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have.
Thank you, Katie. Are there any questions that you'd like to ask Katie? Feel free to voice them or put them in the chat. Okay, well, I am not hearing any questions specific to Katie. I would like, as I mentioned earlier, going a little off script here now, but I have found when we have a group this big, sometimes people don't want to ask questions. So what I'd love for us to do, since the intent is for this to be interactive, I'm going to open up 7 breakout rooms so that you have a chance to, in groups of 5 or 6, just talk over these couple of points here. If there's one key takeaway that you learned from the presentation today, what was that one thing that you'll take along with you back to your nonprofit? Or is there one question that you still have about your board that you didn't get answered? I would love if you have a chance to share on these questions. This seminar is scheduled until 1:15 p.m. We'll likely wrap up before then, but I'm going to go ahead and open up these breakout rooms.
Hey, Genevieve, really quickly, Ricardo asked, besides the auditor's report, what are some documents to see to make sure board oversight is good?
Thank you.
Yes, and as I mentioned, so that governance communication letter, that internal control communication letter, those are separate from the auditor's reports, the specific audited financial statements. But again, looking at those monthly financial statements, looking at the annual budgets, you know, those are really good things just to know that kind of you're getting the information that you would need. Other than that, from a third party, if you don't have an audit, it would be a review or some other type of third party review or agreed upon procedure or something like that if you don't have an audit. Hopefully that answers that question.
Great, thank you, Katie. Any other questions that you see there, Angie?
Nope, I think we're good.
Okay, super. So again, for the breakout rooms, just a little etiquette here that if you are comfortable turning on your camera, you're welcome to, but no worries if you don't. There's no assigned facilitator to your breakout room, but the three of us presenters will be randomly assigned in there with you. If someone wants to assume the role of facilitator, feel free. I encourage you just to exercise active listening. It's a great chance to meet others in the room, to ask your questions and to share on these two questions. When we come back together, we won't be officially reporting out by room, but if there is a key insight that your group wants to share or that you thought was relevant, we'll offer an opportunity to do that, and we'll be sure to wrap up on time by 1:15 p.m. So I'm going to go ahead and open up these breakout rooms. We will convene together again in about 10 minutes.
And we finally got that out to our own account and everything like that, because we were just starting up and trying to figure out what, when, where, why. And I'm just a new member of the board. I used to just be a volunteer. So I think for me, my one takeaway is really tackling those financial things and making sure that the people that are responsible for that to maybe every quarter have a little report saying exactly what we spent, what we got in, that way.
Okay, well, welcome back. It looks like our breakout rooms have closed up. I'd like to thank you all for participating and attending in our training today. If anyone had any other insights or things that were discussed in your group that you want to share, now's your opportunity. And the other thing that I will offer is that after, hello, now I see a bunch of other people on the call. So welcome. Welcome back from your breakout rooms. I hope you enjoyed some of the smaller group discussion. Any insights or thoughts that you discussed in your rooms that you think would be helpful to share with this larger group? Feel free to chime in now if you'd like.
There was a
I had
question.
a question. Oh,
Kate, you had a question.
well, I was on the same board as Fred, so he can go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
What came up in our discussion about board diversity was an idea that I'd never thought of before, and that is whether it would be appropriate or effective to ask members of boards that are diverse for contacts into communities that our boards may not have contact with. I mean, in Grand Prairie Friends, as I was saying in the breakout room, we are a member organization and our board is actually pretty reflective of our membership. The fact of the matter is that we don't have very many minority members in our organization. I mean, anybody can join, but that's just the fact of the matter. And so when we talk to our members, we don't have an entree into communities of minority members who may be interested in nature and in the outdoors, and we're just not aware of them. So the question was, could we go to an organization like Kate's? She says they have a very diverse board. Could we go to them and say, can you connect us with people who might be interested in our case, in the outdoors, so we can increase the diversity of our board?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. I think it's important to reach out to other local organizations who are prioritizing diversity on their boards. And I think they would welcome that. Absolutely.
And Libby, not to put you on the spot, but it looked like maybe you had unmuted. Is there anything you cared to share? Or anyone else for that matter?
Oh, I was, Andrea in or I think that's how you say your name. If it's not, I'm sorry. In our group said that what she does in her board was to create like a fake financial statement or report. And then they like,
Don't tell my auditor that.
yeah. Why don't you say what you do? That's been better than me trying to explain it.
Sorry. I do an annual, here's how you read our monthly financial statement, the income and expense statement. I do that annually for all of my board members. It takes about an hour and a half. We walk through the entire thing going, this is where you want to ask a question. This is what a red flag looks like. And I make up a fake one to go through where I put things in there that it's like, oh, we spent $7,000 on travel expenses when we're local, right? And then I have to explain as the ED that we did indeed take a staff trip to Hawaii. So whoops. So I put things like that in there, and it makes it really easy for people to answer questions later or ask questions later. They feel more comfortable about asking questions, because sometimes when those financials come up in the middle of a board meeting, you're just like, I'm not sure what to ask, and let's just approve it and get it out of the way.
That's awesome, Andrea. I think as board members to go back and request that of your CEOs or your executive directors as maybe a board strategic moment or educational session, that would be welcomed. And I think that's a great idea.
I love that idea. Great idea.
Yeah, so that could be perhaps an ongoing board training moment that could be offered. Well, it's almost time to close out, but any final question or thought that came out of your breakout room discussions? Well, this conversation is to be continued at the Community Foundation of East Central Illinois. This work falls under our Center for Nonprofit Excellence, And in 2022, we intend to offer a longer, fleshed out quarterly board bootcamp series where we're going to hone in on additional topics that are of interest to you, as well as expand on some of the content that we learned today. So stay tuned for that. For those of you who are executive directors, we offer an executive director leadership network that meets once a month. We're currently doing it on Zoom, and we'll reassess that in the coming year. But it's a great forum to share strategies and talk with each other, offer support, and learn best practices. So if you're interested in that, or if your executive director might be or might not be aware of that, feel free to have them email me. I'm going to put my email in the chat right now. And I would invite their participation. That would be great. I'd like to just thank today our presenters, Angie and Katie, showing our appreciation for their time. And thank all of you for being with us today. I've enjoyed hearing your questions and look forward to working with you to strengthen our nonprofit sector. We'll be sending out the presentation slides for today, and also the recording of today's session will be made available on our YouTube channel starting next week. So thank you all for being here today. Hope you have a great rest of this wet day today. I enjoyed our time in Zoom land together with you. Have a great day. Thank you.